So how did your very nice Indian family feel about this when you said you're going to drop out of college?
Well, we didn't discuss that. Uh,
Okay.
I don't recommend it for all our listeners. I think I was naive back then. Here's the thing, right? I felt I would not make it to the fellowship. So
Yeah.
I told my parents, I'm going to the US. There are these very nice people who are paying for my trip. Why? What's the trouble? They said, okay, that's fine. If you're traveling there just for some person is paying for the trip, that's okay. And then as soon as they become a TL fellow, they actually put it out on the press. So the Indian press starts covering it in local languages. So my parents read that. I'm still in California. They call me and they're like, Ritesh, this newspapers say that you've won some fellowship, and there's apparently, this is a matter of great prestige and so on. I was like, yes, speaking of that, I'm not going to go to university after this. And that's how it broke to them. So they weren't very excited about it to begin with. Funnily, a couple of times, my mother, I don't know if you know, in Indian Americans in the US may not relate with it, but my mother told me a couple of times, after that, a couple of years saying, do you not want to do just physical university? Can you do correspondence? Because in India, a lot of people get like the correspondence degree. And I had to tell her that I am barred, like I have promised to stop out of university for 2 years. I can't be doing this. So one of these years, I think 3 or 4 years back, the Prime Minister of India was on a very important event. And he says, whenever I listen to Ritesh, it feels like, why did a tea seller not want to be a hotel chain owner? And this was on live television, and my parents were watching. So that's the day my mom sent a message saying, I think it's okay for you not to go to your university.
It
But
took that moment. It took that moment. Well, as a
so
mother myself, I can kind of relate. Although I have to say, I'm kind of encouraging my son to really, I'd like to think, put this entrepreneurial spirit into him. I think in my family, we really value that free spirit and independent thinking that I think you had inherently within you. And I think that it's so interesting. Like now looking back, do you have any advice for kids literally who are in high school, who have watched The Social Network, who too want to sort of chase that dream and drop out of school? Like, do you recommend it? I mean, what do you think looking back?
So I think in our tier fellowship, the contract or the paper document that we sort of look at, the first page would say something fascinating, right? It would say, I think Mark Twain's quotes, which is, we never let university interfere with education. So I believe education is extremely critical.
Yeah,
The only thing is, education doesn't need to come from the pre-established framework of universities. They could come from, frankly, anywhere. I got the
exactly.
opportunity to get education from this fascinating other fellows from the ground, from my visits to a lot of these hotels and guest houses by building my own business. People could get this education from probably universities or anything else. So my view is that I would encourage education and the pursuit of excellence for that. Now, whatever you feel brings you that excellence in education, I'd believe by all means.
Yeah. I think that's so spot on. It's about being curious and constantly learning. And speaking of learning, I'm sure you get asked all the time, like, what have you learned? But you know what I'm actually interested in? What did you have to unlearn in order to kind of become a disruptive, supersonic startup founder?
I think, uh, first off, I'm glad you asked me this question. There's nobody who's asked me this question by far. Uh, but this is an answer that I try to give a lot of times. I think I grew up in an ecosystem when I was launching our first hotel in New Delhi. Even if I said I wanted to build the biggest hotel chain in south of Delhi in the next 30 years, everybody around me would look at me and say, this is the biggest mistake you're making. There is no way that's going to happen. But when I was in the Bay Area, one of like every Thiel fellow I knew would always by design think big even before they started their business. I remember my friend Thomas, Alex, everybody constantly thinking about big things. And when I would look at them, I'd feel like, gosh, I think so small. I think just the ability of being able to think big, and not think big for the sake of it, but because of the genuine, innocent intention of wanting to make large impact. I think that truly fascinated me, and I had to unlearn myself from being somebody who's very focused on doing small things because the bigger things are reserved for other people, to sort of thinking that if you solve a problem, you could make a difference as big as anybody else. I think that was a fascinating learning for me.